Now, MPs are being asked to reconsider the police and crime bill after the initial plans were rejected by the House of Lords. The proposed new laws would allow officers to break up demonstrations considered too noisy, for instance, and ban people from gluing or locking themselves to each other or vital infrastructure. The government says changes are needed following protests by the Stroud-based Extinction Rebellion. Here's Hayley Mortimer.
Their fear is that this could become illegal. Kill the Bill protesters in Bristol and across the UK have been marching against the controversial police and crime bill and for their right to protest.
The Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill is a huge piece of legislation. The most controversial part is changes to the way we protest. The bill would allow police to put more conditions on static protests, like start and finish times and noise limits. It would also create an offence of intentionally causing a public nuisance.
And campaigners say this is an attack on freedom of speech.
Why do they need these extra powers? It seems to be completely over the top. It seems to be just an attempt to crush dissent. And for all those people who find protest annoying and disruptive for them, there could come a day where they want to protest. There could come a time when something happens that really upsets them and really concerns them. They should be aware that they could be losing their democratic right to protest as well.
It would make protests more complex, and it would have quite severe criminal penalties for people that do go out and protest. And this is important for so many different issues, but one of the things that we've highlighted is that the suffragettes and the suffragists 100 years ago who fought for the right for women to vote, they would have been criminalised by this bill and they wouldn't have been allowed to protest in the ways that they did.
The bill is a direct response to protests by Extinction Rebellion. In 2019, the climate group brought cities to a standstill, and police were frustrated that they couldn't do more to minimise the impact.
In recent years, we have seen a significant change in protest tactics, with protesters exploiting gaps in the law, which have led to disproportionate amounts of disruption. Last year, we saw XRUK blocking the passage of an ambulance on emergency calls, gluing themselves to train during rush hour, blocking airport runways, preventing hundreds of hard-working people from going to work.
The government says the police response to protests would still need to be proportionate, but Extinction Rebellion says the bill poses a threat to democracy.
I think this bill has been specifically targeting Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter and other social movements at the minute who are being effective. And so that's what it's about really, is, these people are being a bit effective, so we better bring in some legislation to make them less effective. That's really worrying.
Last week, the House of Lords rejected a number of the most controversial proposals, and the bill will now return to the House of Commons for MPs to have their say.
In the common life of a city like Bristol and of the nation more widely, the right to protest is essential in communicating the concerns of those who feel unheard.
This bill also protects retail workers. It protects the police from being attacked. It's trying to stop pregnant women being photographed when they're breastfeeding. It's doing all sorts of things, including county lines. So this kind of campaign to stop the bill just for the sake of some sort of misunderstandings about protests is really wrong in my view.
Campaigners also want people to be safe, but say without disruption, there is rarely any action.
Thank you, Hayley. Well, let's bring in Dr Gail Bradbrook from Extinction Rebellion, one of the founder members. She's in Stroud. Thanks for coming on. Your tactics have made this bill possible, haven't they?
Our tactics have been effective in highlighting that we have an existential threat. Some people may have seen the Netflix movie Don't Look Up, when an asteroid's about to hit the planet. There's an actual asteroid in the form of the climate and ecological crisis.
So how does blocking off Bristol Bridge or gluing yourself to a road actually help that?
Well, it clearly did. You could see a spike in interest in environmental issues. And when people just simply hold a placard and keep out of the way and aren't noisy and disruptive, those kinds of protests get ignored. The environment movement has been protesting for 30 years using means that people find less disruptive, and they don't work.
So it's okay to target members of the public, not government buildings or powerful people, but people going to work. That's fine.
We do both, and what we're trying to do is highlight issues.
By stopping people getting to hospital?
We've never done that. I think that's just
You did in Bristol. No, that is a fact. That happened in Bristol.
We always try and let ambulances through, and we always.
No, it was somebody going to see their father on his deathbed.
So that wasn't stopping an ambulance.
Well, it was stopping someone getting to hospital.
Well, people are going to be disrupted. They're going to be disrupted when there's no food on the shelves. They're going to be disrupted when there's mass starvation, when there's floods and heat dome effects and tipping points in the Earth's climate system that are creating life on Earth.
All right.
We're not doing this because it's a small issue. This issue is not being dealt with. Our carbon footprint as a country is still going up, and we're not tackling an existential threat.
All right. Look, let me bring in somebody else. Answer those, David Warburton. Answer those points on behalf of the government. I mean, she has the point that these are trivial events, but they bring publicity and they've affected policy. What do you say to that?
I think there's an enormous amount of misunderstanding going on here, and I have an enormous amount of sympathy for Gail's her motives. Peaceful protest is, of course, a vital cornerstone of our democracy, but it can't be at the expense of public safety. And last year's demonstrations, as we know, disrupted thousands of people's journeys, put the lives of road users and police officers at risk, did block emergency services, but also, ironically, it had a detrimental effect on the very issue that they were trying to promote by angering the public, by pressing their cause, which is trying to help people in the long run, by actively trying not to help people.
So does that justify a power grab by the state?
No. The measures in the bill are not about stopping or clamping down on the right to protest, but they're about ensuring that the police can better manage highly disruptive protests. And there has to be a balance. This is about balancing
But disruptive protest tends to be the protest that gets results.
Absolutely. There are many, many ways to get your point across, but that shouldn't be by disrupting people's lives and then in many ways harming the very cause that you're trying to promote.
Okay, let's bring in Darren Jones. I mean, this is there's been a significant change, hasn't there, to protest tactics. Is the government right to sort of modernise the law?
Well, we in the Labour Party think that the policing bill goes too far, which is why we voted against it when it came to the House of Commons recently. We think the powers to clamp down on protests if it's too noisy, for example, is going too far. We agree that when perhaps people are lying in the M32 to block traffic, police need the powers to be able to move them on for their own safety and for the safety of others. But we haven't supported the Conservatives' bill because we think it could be used to really clamp down on peaceful protest in a democratic society in a way that shouldn't be on the statute book.
So what would you do, given if you were in government and roads were closed and people couldn't get to work or couldn't get to their appointments? What's the solution? To facilitate it?
Well, as I say, I think what you want to ensure is that the police have the authority and power to move people on if they're causing themselves into a position of unsafety or others.
But they have that power already, don't they?
Well, there may be additional measures to help them to do it more quickly.
So you'd support a watered-down bill?
I think we don't want to go as far as the Conservatives, who are putting these very wide-ranging powers in the bill that could be taken too far. And as I say, we don't think that should be on the statute book, and that's why we've not voted for it.
All right, let's go back to Gail. What's wrong with peaceful protest, which is orderly and organised with the police beforehand?
Well, I think it's important to say that there are many police officers that have objected, and there's been an official letter written by some of them to this very bill. They're saying they don't want these powers. It changes the situation to where it's one, we're not policing with consent. What we're trying to do is get in the way of democracy. So the police already have many powers that they can use, and they have to balance these powers. And if you give them too many, they're saying it's going to get in the way of tackling other forms of actual serious crime and violent disorder. So there are police officers not wanting this.
But aren't you jolly glad to see the police during some of these protests to protect you from an angry public?
I mean, obviously the police have to do their job, and we have police liaison officers, some of whom are former police officers themselves, who talk to the police and try and support the protest to go as well as possible. I mean, I think it's important to notice that part of this is a step in the direction of authoritarianism. It's part of a wider set of measures that are seriously worrying. You know, even the former Home Secretary, Theresa May, has been a strong vocal critic of this bill, saying that, you know, it's tempting when you're Home Secretary to think that giving yourself more power is reasonable, because we all think we're reasonable. You have to think about what future Home Secretaries are doing. Okay. Others have not minced their words. They're saying this is dictators' powers. This reminds me of when Hitler passed the Enabling Act in 1933.
Does it really, seriously, it reminds you of Hitler?
Seriously, when you look at it in the context of other attacks on democracy.
Some people will say you lose an argument when you bring in Hitler.
The Home Secretary was given herself dictatorial powers. She was going to be able to pass measures without the scrutiny of Parliament. It's something that's been happening in this government in a number of fronts. You've also got undermining the free press with the Official Secrets Act.
All right, we won't have a list, because I want to get David. You've had a good go. I want David Warburton to respond to that.
This bill draws a distinction specifically between peaceful protests and activities which inhibit the lives of people. And Gail's absolutely right to say that it brings in an awful lot of other measures. It changes sentencing rules so that serious criminals spend more time in jail. It allows judges to consider jailing child murderers for their entire lives. It addresses assaults against emergency workers and terrorism, all sorts of things, and also helps offenders with underlying problems in their lives. This bill has an enormous breadth, and I think people are focusing rather wrongly and rather, you know, if I may say so, slightly hysterically on a very small part of it.
Just a last word from Darren again, if I may. Do you think the protests have actually changed government policy?
I think it gets it in the news, which can apply pressure to ministers. But the trouble with this bill, the government has a tendency of doing this. Yes, there are good things in the bill, but you can't sneak through the really bad things. If the government really wants to work cross-party on these issues, the excessive powers on protest could be removed, and all of the great stuff around protecting retail workers and frontline workers we would support, but they can't sneak through these excessive powers.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.